Thank you for joining us today for our masterclass. I'm Kerry Brox from the Institute for Learning Performance, and our vision is actually enhancing human performance. So today's masterclass is really an important one because it's, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what Steve's got to say about the latest research about on the brain and how we can actually use those neuroscience concepts on and use those to improve our designing and learning of learning initiatives. So I'm really excited. I've got my notepad ready. So I'm going to hand over to our host, Bill Gerard. Thanks, Bill.
All right, thanks, Kerry. Once again, a super long introduction there from you, and welcome. Thank you.
Always keep it short and sweet, you know that.
Well, as you know, for most of you that have been here before, one of the joys I have with ILP is organizing and being involved in these master classes, which have been, just terrific so far. So what I want to do at this stage is just do a couple of things to remind us. First of all, I know Steve wants to interact with people during the day, so if you have a video camera available, please go ahead and have it on when you're doing that, but possibly keep your audio on mute, so just in case we don't get any mixed background and things like that. The other thing we're going to do is the way we run these sessions now is that very shortly I'm going to set the scene for what Steve's going to do, and I'm going to ask Rebecca Sharp to do an intro to Steve, and then Steve will take over with Beck monitoring the chats for questions and things like that. And then following Steve's session, after Kerry's given the final thanks to him, I'm going to be taking back over, and Kerry and I are going to work together to, again, look at something relevant to all of our members in particular, but hopefully everybody in the L&D industry. And today we're going to be looking at, for those of you that would have seen Kerry's email that went out yesterday, we're going to be looking at the ILP certifications and where they fit in helping us as L&D professionals differentiate ourselves, stand out from the crowd. Last masterclass, we had Jane Anderson on talking about personal branding, which is going to be very important to differentiate ourselves in a world where now learning and development people from anywhere in the world can come and compete with us just as we can compete with them. So I'm looking at how we can start to differentiate ourselves. And my view is that our certification programs is one way to do that. So we want to take you through some of that, what that's about, what some of the value and benefits of that is, and how you can get involved. So that's what's going to follow that. So we're going through till 5 o'clock. Steve will have about an hour with you to take us through the brain stuff. Now, as to today's session, Rebecca Sharp, when she got excited about being involved with Steve, and she can tell you a bit more about that. She was talking about how this understanding of the brain, neuroscience, and how it fits got me excited as well, because as some of you may know, a very dear friend of mine, Tony Buzan, was very much into this space. In fact, his lifelong mission from being a young man till he passed last year was very much about what he called global mental literacy. That is, understanding of the brain and its functions and how it works, not necessarily from a medical point of view, but from a neurological science and process point of view, how we can actually do more with it. And that was a mission that I bought into, and Jennifer, my partner, particularly bought into as we worked with him all over the world for more than 20 years. So I'm really looking forward to Steve's presentation to see what he has to talk about and to introduce that, etc. One of the things that's going to happen today is we're not going to be using a lot of PowerPoint slides. So what I recommend people do is when Steve starts is switch yourself into speaker view rather than gallery view, so that you can actually get a good view of what he's talking about, because he's going to be using whiteboards and things like that. So if you switch to speaker view, that will give you a much better process. And also, and Beck will remind us, she's going to be monitoring the chat room or the chat box to see any questions as we go through the process. But Beck, can I turn it over to you, because you were really excited about what you were doing with Steve and what you were seeing, and you got hold of Kerry and I, and you said, you got to have this guy with us. So why don't you introduce him for us, and then we'll turn it over to him.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bill. So thank you guys so much for coming today. As Bill said, I was very excited about some time that I've been spending with Steve learning about some of the work that he's been doing, and just thought, it's such an amazing opportunity to bring some of his learning over to our audience as well. And I think particularly because we've now got our COVID second wave and we're all feeling a little bit lethargic and emotions are a little bit high from that as well. I think it's even a better time to talk about why we feel the way we feel and sort of what's happening from that experience as well. So Steve is a behaviour and neuroscience expert. He's an engagement specialist. He's worked with some of the UK's biggest companies, such as Merlin Entertainments, which for those of us in Australia will know sort of the Legolands and the Sea Life Aquariums and those sorts of businesses. He's also worked for Sainsbury's, which is one of the large supermarket chains there. And he's currently working in nuclear energy, or doing a lot of work in nuclear energy. And he's also an author. He's written a couple of books, Mr. Badger books. So Mr. Badger Moves Home, which is a leading change book, which I particularly like. That's my favourite. And Mr. Badger creates his own green path, which is about just how you move employees to exercise their own judgment to make decisions as well. So some really good, and they're storytelling books as well. So learning around change and judgment through the art of stories with Mr. Badger and Al, which they're really great books. Actually, the Mr. Badger Moves Home is one of my two favourite change books. And funnily enough, when we were chatting the other day, we happened to chat about my other favourite change book. So yeah, highly recommended. Steve's very generous with his time. He's very passionate about when he speaks, which makes him really highly engaging. And I just think you guys will thoroughly enjoy today. If you do have any questions, as I said, I'll keep an eye out on the chat there, which I can see people are starting to talk. Yeah, and I'll butt in to Steve as he's going with any of your questions, because I know we sort of talked about having a nice interactive session. So for now, I will put myself back on mute and I'll let Steve take it away.
Cool, thanks, Beck. So it's a gloomy morning in the UK, but good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for the introduction. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today. So thanks for inviting me and thanks for joining in. I want to give you a whirlwind tour of some of the most interesting and most useful and relevant aspects of what I've learned in the last 14 to 20 years. As Beck highlighted, my background is various. And I've long been fascinated with what drives human behaviour, and that's more lately led me to work with the nuclear industry in the UK, where understanding what drives good behaviour and what stymies bad behaviour is kind of important. So if any of you have been watching the HBO programme about Chernobyl, you'll know how importantly the nuclear industry focus on behaviour. My intention for today is just to share with you some of my passion. It's not to make you a neuroscientist in any way. So picking up on what Bill said, it's not about getting closer to the scientific names, but a little bit more understanding of this miracle that sits between our ears, I think is infinitely useful in bringing out the best in our learners and giving you an ability to design learning interactions that are more memorable, more useful and more transferable back into the business. The more we know about this piece of kit between our ears, the better our profession can be. So it's not going to be a deep dive in any way. We're going to kind of skim across the surface of some of the more impactful learning that I've had. And hopefully at the end we'll get some questions and we'll link it into what's really going on for you in your environment. There's no paraphernalia. This is the way I work. When I stand in front of you live, this is me. I'd rather it be more of a conversation. So if there's any point there's something that is it's inspired in you, or something that you want answering, get it onto the chat, and Beck can give me some signals, and I'll answer that question as we go. So ask it when you get the question, and I'll answer it as best I can, and that way we'll build up a conversation. So does that feel okay for everybody? Good stuff. I like it. You've all been on Zoom for a while, so big nods and big thumbs up. That all works for me. So I read a book recently during lockdown, and the quote stayed with me for a while. It's by a guy called Bob Mowat, who was an American sports coach, and he's written a couple of books that, unless you're into sports, I don't recommend, but they're okay. But the quote's great. He says that the human mind is the fastest, the coolest, the most complex and efficient computer ever produced in large numbers by unskilled labour. And I used to quote quite a lot that whenever we buy technology, you get a Bible that goes with it, an instruction manual. But for this piece of kit in between our ears, we don't get it. So most of us are making it up. And that's really been the path of neuroscience and psychology and learning and development for so long. And now that we're beginning to get more sophisticated in our understanding, we're building up a bank of user manual hints. So that's really what I want to do. My outcome really for this session is to just leave you with a little bit more knowledge, but more importantly, just a shared sense of what I feel is awe and wonder with this thing. And just a bit more curiosity as to how you can take these nuggets that I'm going to give you and use them in your own work to just bring a bit more joy, a bit more passion, a bit more of people's brains and personalities into learning, and kind of move it away from that pour and snore that we see far too much of out in the field. How does that look, Sanford? You up for a bit of that? Good stuff. So let's talk about a little bit about what this wonderful piece of kit is. The average brain weighs about 3 pounds, and it's just meat. It's fat, gristle, and a few neurons. What do we know about it? We think the last count, there's about 86 billion neurons inside this. So neurons are these kind of things. These are the building blocks of what we're talking about. Each of those neurons, we believe, has the capability of connecting to 1,000 other neurons, which, when you start doing the maths, means that that's more potential connections than known and countable stars in our universe, which is quite mind-blowing. And we often get asked the question, you know, do we use the full potential of our brains? Well, the simple answer is no. When you work out the potential mathematically, we're probably using less than 4% of that potential. And as we were talking about earlier on, this is about exercising that brain. And the more that we get into lifelong learning, the more that we can access that potential. So a lot of people will leave school and then that's it. And they believe that their brain is the most malleable and most learnable at an early age. What we now know is that your brain continues that process all the way through life. So when we stop learning, the brain begins to atrophy, just like any muscle. And we believe that a lot of the early onset of some of our neurological problems that we get in older age is because we're just not exercising enough. So just like someone who sits behind a desk and becomes quite vegetative, the same thing is going to happen with the brain. So if ever there's a campaign that says lifelong learning, keep getting in there to L&D, then, you know, if you want to protect yourself in older age, keep learning, keep learning, keep learning, keep learning. So 86 billion neurons, they're firing 18 trillion times a second. So this is a busy piece of kit and it never really goes to sleep. So if you want to go and win some money when you go to a party, those are a couple of really good nuggets for you. What else can we tell you? The firing that we go through, now that we can sensitively measure the brain, we believe that your thoughts, or the things that we consider your thoughts, go around your brain at about 268 miles an hour. So that's faster than a Formula One race car. Those thoughts consume about 30% of the calories that you take into your body. At this point, people go, does that mean I can think myself thin? And the answer is no. whatever you consume, your brain will take 30% of it. So if you don't take in enough nourishment, then your brain is starved. So again, where we see people who have strong work ethics, where they miss their refreshment breaks, where they work at their desks, believing that that's actually highly productive, neuroscience is proving the opposite, that your brain needs a break, your brain needs to take in nutrients in order for it to keep on board. It doesn't need you to gorge, but it does need small and regular intakes. Beside all of this complexity, the one thing that confounds us is it's super complex, but it can't parallel process. So we have a belief that we can multitask, and it's actually not true. We can do several things at the same time, but what it means is we just divide the same amount of bandwidth amongst 7 things. So what you end up doing is 7 things at a lower degree of accuracy and quality, as opposed to 1 thing. Because actually what's going on is we can only consciously think of or consciously apply our thinking to 1 thing. The brain is actually taking care of your heart, your blood pressure, your temperature. So it's quite busy before even you and your conscious brain gets involved. Now, when I do this one live, a lot of people will say, oh no, you know, and we get into a battle of the sexes in the so there's an interesting game for you to play at a party, is just get yourself with a partner and a stopwatch and time yourself doing this activity. So the first activity is count from 1 to 10 and just time it. Most of the time people will get about 2 to 3 seconds to count from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The next job then is to recite the letters of the alphabet from A to I. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. And again, it's about 3 to 4 seconds. So the final test is then count 1, A, 2, B, 3, C. Now, mathematically and logically, that should only take about 6 seconds, but you'll be amazed at how much longer it takes. And the reason is your brain has to go discover the algorithm for 1 to 10 and find that sequence. And then in between, it has to find a different algorithm for A to J. So the actual extra time is where it switches off one algorithm, finds another one, re-engages it. So it's constantly doing this. So when we're in offices and we're answering the phone and doing emails and typing reports, the same thing is happening. You have a well-worn path for each of those activities, that if you want to be efficient, you do all of your phone calls whilst you're on that neural path. And it's the same thing when we get into a learning environment. Often when there was a huge movement in accelerated learning, and what we tended to do was overload the learning environment with lots of things going on, believing that that was what we'd call a stimulation-rich environment. And actually what that was doing was actually confusing people's brains. So they were kind of going, well, there's something on the screen there, and there's something on the table here, and there's something going on around here. And their brains were trying to monitor 3 things. And what we actually have learned now is, whilst that's really stimulating, what we need to do is direct the brain to say, right, now focus on the screen, and now focus on this, and now focus on that. And that way we get a better and more efficient neural access. So that one good? Big nods? Good stuff. What else can I tell you about the brain? There's a bit of a myth. Everybody sees brains like this. So you'll watch programs like CSI, and everybody believes that the brain is kind of a solid mass. It only actually takes on that form once it's had formaldehyde put into it. The brain's consistency is actually, according to Matthew Walker, kind of like a thick custard and jelly. In order for your neural pathways to work, and in order for, because it's 80% water, so it will be quite fluid. And that actually gave rise to this concept of neuroplasticity, that whilst your neurons are existing in this gelatinous state, it means that they can grow and they can be severed at will. So it's not as solid as we think. It actually wobbles around quite a bit, and that's why we suffer from vertigo, and why if you've had head trauma, we can damage the brain really, really easily. So it only actually takes on this format once we've taken it out of the skull. So let's talk about the evolution of your brain. So it's the end, or the most recent product of an evolutionary process that started about 360 million years ago, where we emerged from the primordial gloop. So as we came out of that gloop, our brain structures were very basic, and they were very much driven and guided by our environment. So it was just a reactionary piece of kit. So if you hold your thumb up in front of you and put it down, that's kind of what this brain structure looks like. We called it the reptilian complex because we share it with reptiles, but it basically has a stem that goes down your brain stem, and it has a very
Steve, you seem to be breaking up on us.
I think we've lost Steve altogether now, sadly.
Hello.
There you are.
Hello.
We got to your thumb like this, and then it all froze.
So reptilian complex is downward thumb. About 200 million years ago, mammals evolved, and we got what we called the mammalian brain, which wraps around the top of the reptilian complex. So what we share with mammals is longer term memories, emotions and feelings. So this is what came on board. So this is where mammals learn to care for their young, and it also is about learning habits and rituals. So we notice amongst mammals that they do go along quite a ritualistic behavioral pattern, and all of those are encoded in this mammalian complex, the limbic system. So when we talk about long-term memory and lifelong learning, the challenge is to get all of that learning into this limbic system. So this is where the amygdala is, where the hippocampus is, all of that kind of darker bit in the middle. That's the challenge for us. What happens when we do learning in short bursts is it tends to stay up in the higher levels of our brains until the brain decides that it's important enough for it to trigger the amygdala. Equally, you know, one of the things that we know about getting it into long-term memory is the involvement of state and emotion. So the more highly emotional people are, so the more they're enjoying things, the more they're challenged, the more that they're feeling part of the learning process, the quicker that avenue is of getting down into shaking that hippocampus and making the limbic system take it on at a deeper level. About 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens or Homo erectus came about, and what we then have to have is a third part of the brain, and that's this bit that you see. The crenellated edge around the brain is the neocortex, so the new cortex, and that's where our consciousness is. So anybody who talks to themselves, yeah, that voice inside your head is the neocortex. And up until probably about 40 years ago, that's where our science believed that real thinking was. It was in the conscious brain, and the most power was in there. And that's because that's the only place that we can have access to. So when we're talking to ourselves, when we're asking ourselves questions, when we're reflecting on things, all of that is going on in this upper level, which led us to believe that that's where all the power was. About 10 to 15 years ago, we identified that there's 10 times as many signals going from the limbic system up to the neocortex than vice versa. So the belief now is actually the limbic system is the strongest and most powerful part of the brain, and that's what's driving it. The fact that we can't consciously access it doesn't mean that it isn't happening. So where we thought all of our consciousness and all of our meditation was taking us is actually wrong. The driving system is the reptilian reactions feeding into the limbic system about what we think and feel about it, and then that gives access to a certain percentage that we can cognitively assess. As if any of you have been on a Tony Robbins conference, you will know he's passionate about all motion is driven by emotion, and that kind of backs up the fact that the driving force is this limbic system that's pushing things in there. It keeps a lot behind because you don't need to know about your heart rate. It just goes, relax, we've got this. Otherwise, you'd just be completely overloaded with just trying to run a body. Even at the latest research where we strap 3 or 4 Cray supercomputers together, we still haven't created a computer sophisticated enough to do the basics that your brain does. So that's kind of what we've got. And this is the triune brain that we're talking about. You've got reptilian, limbic system, neocortex built on top of that one. So I just want to share with you a bit more detail about what those bits do. So if you take a slice out of your head that way, this is kind of what it's going to look like. So reptilian brain is nestled nicely in this section here. Can you all see this? So it's nestled nicely inside here, and it goes down into the brainstem. So again, reptilian system, all of your nerves, all of your sensors go straight into that, and it decides what it's going to do with it. So it's based on instinct, it's based on reactions, and it acts probably about 1/10 of a second before you're even consciously aware of it. So a lot of the time, our behavior is driven. We're actually doing things before we know it. There's a great bit of research that says you're actually scratching an itch before you become consciously aware that you've got an itch, which is really fascinating in one sense, but it's really frightening when you think that we allow ourselves to drive cars and fly aircraft. So sitting in there, that's where your reptilian complex is. Around that, we've got your mammalian brain, your limbic system. So again, so what's in here is your habits, your rituals, your long-term memory, and a lot of your what we call your F responses. So when your early warning system, your radar, your reptilian system says this is a threat to us, it then goes into the limbic system, and the limbic system says what's the best strategy to keep me on the planet. So we start with fight or flight. The other F responses are freeze, feast, famine, fart, and go and procreate. So we've got some kind of things in there that we're just really not in control of. So what you'll find is that people's reactions are not conscious. So that they'll panic, they'll run away. At times of great worry, some people will go and gorge, because that takes us back 35,000 years to a point that said you might not get another meal. So some people who struggle with their weight because of stressful times, it's actually at an instinctive level. So cognitively, they know that they shouldn't be going and gorging, but actually there's a driving system below their consciousness that they can't help it. It's just something that's coming out of them. Again, if you're like me, at times of worry, I'm a famine. I just starve because I lose my appetite. So there's huge amounts of evidence and research coming into some of the societal problems that we've got that say actually this was part of us 35 million years ago, and understanding it is very different to tackling it at that level. So it's helping people learn different strategies rather than their go-to F. It's giving them a different F. Then the really cool bit that we're interested in as learning professionals is this thinking brain, this neocortex. Huge amounts of research in fMRI scanning are going into this one. And I just want to give you a guided tour of roughly what's going on around this. At the front here, this bit behind your forehead, that's the prefrontal cortex. So those of you that talk to yourselves or are going to admit on a Zoom meeting that you do, that's where the voices are. This is the bit that is going to burn the most calories. So when you've had a really, really big thinking day, this is where you get a headache here, because this thing's getting hot. It burns, of the available calories, this takes the lion's share of the calories that your brain will have. The rest of your brain, the limbic system and the reptilian system, actually keeps about 70, or takes 70% of the energy, just in case there's a saber-toothed tiger about to attack you. That survival instinct is still within us. So for all of the calories and all of the energy that your brain takes, it will keep as much in reserve just in case you need to run away, which is why we resist mental effort. So Daniel Kahneman a few years ago won a Nobel Prize for System 1 and System 2 thinking, and this is the biological reason behind it. System 1 thinking is our reactive, quick thinking because it doesn't take any energy. So we'll just go to the easiest answer. We'll just go to the most habitual answer because that doesn't burn unnecessary calories. When you're then given so if we say, what's 2 + 2? You're not consciously calculating 2 + 2. You're just giving an answer that you know has been given a correct, a big tick all of your life. So we've got loads and loads of those System 1 answers. So when somebody says, how are you? The System 1 answer is, I'm fine. And the System 1 response is, okay, and we move on. If we want to get into System 2, people will say, well, let me tell you how I'm feeling. I've got a bit of an ache in my leg. And all of a sudden that takes up lots and lots of cognitive energy, which means this reptilian system says, oh my God, if a tiger comes around the corner, we're dead. So we've got a biological bias towards taking the easy path. And that's why sometimes we get a lot of resistance in a learning environment because you created too much System 2 and they're going into a threat response that says, I will die if I keep thinking this way. So that's kind of the science that sits behind Danny Kahneman in there. What else goes on in this busy part of your brain is your learning part. So this is where your social skill is. I'm a big fan of the NeuroLeadership Institute, and there's a guy called Matthew Lieberman who presented a huge amount of research on that said your brain is actually a social organ. So where we think of the workplace or the learning environment as a place where we go to and learn or do work, and then as a byproduct we socialize, your brain actually sees it in reverse. It sees it as a social environment in which we learn or a social environment in which we do work. So again, a lot of the things that we've done quite clumsily in the past about getting people to meet each other and build rapport with each other is absolutely vital. If we don't have that social network, then the brain is on high alert for threat. So whilst it's trying to defend threat, it can't learn. So a lot of the ways that we can ease in and open up the limbic system is creating a network of trust and vulnerability where people feel okay, and then they can use their brain properly onto the learning. If we just go into a huge seminar and it's full of strangers, we find it really difficult to take on information because your brain's actually going, that person's going to stab you, that person's going to steal your resources. So again, there's an importance in building relationships between the presenter and the learners and those that are sitting around us in order to get the brain primed to be able to do its job in learning. What else is going on here? This is about consequences. So this is when children are watching you, that's what's going on. They're processing, if you do that, this will happen. So they're kind of learning how to socialize with people. If I smile at people, they smile back at me. And it sends a signal down to the reptilian complex that says, and that's good. So they're learning all of this consequence stuff. Beck, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so there's a question from Rachel. She said, does that mean that when we are in lockdown or social isolation, the brain sees it as a threat?
Absolutely, absolutely. Different people will process it in different ways. So introverted thinkers will have a bigger capacity for that, but we're beginning to notice that even as me, as an introvert, I need a passport to do things like this. So when I get on stage in front of 1,000 people, it's a real challenge. But even people like myself will notice that it isn't about being lonely, it's about feeling connected. Actually, the knowledge that I can reach out is probably enough. But people who are higher up on that social need, so highly extroverted people, you'll find that they really, really struggle with isolation. And they're the first ones leaping out on the streets and going to your public spaces just to be with people. So there's no kind of hard and fast, but there will be a spectrum of what people require. But absolutely. And we've known it for since we were children. You know, what was the worst punishment that we had as children in the playground? Being ignored. You know, we just used to send people to Coventry. The same thing happens in businesses. You know, the dark side of the political environment in businesses is we ostracize people. And if we take it to the extreme in prisons and in that system, what's the harshest treatment? We just put people in the dark hole. So we've kind of known it, you know, and people who work in the care industry know this as well. So as people get older, it's actually the loneliness and isolation that is more detrimental to their health and well-being than some of the physical conditions that they have. It's a great question. Does that answer the question? Was it Rachel that asked the question? Thank you. Keep them coming. What else have we got here? So that's the prefrontal cortex. So that's all about consequences and social skills. There's a section here at the top of your skull, which is kind of like a GPS. It's brilliant. So it knows where you are on the planet. My apologies, ladies. It's more highly developed in the male of the species than the female. And you should feel good about that one, because way back when we lived in caves and you used to send your fella out to go and get food, he wouldn't have been a great fella if he couldn't find his way back. So that's kind of what it was all about. But you'll notice it when you go and stay in these wonderful generic hotels, that very, very quickly, your room, which is identical to every other room in a 1,000-room hotel, has certain unique points that you've identified. So there might be a stain on the carpet just outside the door, or a chip in the wood on the door, but you can find your way back relatively quickly. And that's part of our survival instinct, and it exists in here. The good things that I'm going to, now that I've blown sunshine up the boys' backsides, ladies, you are more neuronally dense in your brains than men. So on an evolutionary scale, men are life's cannon fodder. We needed to think simply, and that's why we like a remote control. That's all we need. Give us the remote control and access to Amazon or Netflix, and we're happy bunnies. Because actually, all we needed to do was to be able to go out, find food, bring it back. That was it. When we examined the brain cavity of schools, the reason that we know that women are neuronally more dense is because they have a bigger skull cavity. And the reason for that, we believe, is the complexity of thought that it requires to nurture young. So at about 8 weeks old in the womb, when the lady decides that we're going to give birth to a boy, she gives the fetus a testosterone wash, which actually knocks out about 30% of the neurons in the male brain. So you're doing it before they even come out, and creating nature's cannon fodder. What else can I tell you here? The back part of the neocortex is primarily focused on visual. So most of your visual input goes through your eyes and goes straight to the back of the skull. This bit here creates patterns and identifies patterns. So your basal ganglia, in order to save energy, builds up. This is where most of your biases are formed. So in order to save brain energy and create neural shortcuts, we create biases that say every time this person is in the room, they always shout. So you'll basically say, as soon as you see that face here, this one will go, they're going to shout. They may not, but this is where we get these huge generalizations that says all men are, all women are, all UK people are, blah, 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 because it's just easier. We've got a lot of evidence built up here that says more often than not, that's what it is. Yeah, that's about it. Balance happens around here, so through the ears, in these parietal lobes. But those, I think, are the main parts that are important to what we're talking about. Are there any questions on the anatomy that anybody have got? Do you want to know anything else about this bit of kit? All good? Brilliant. Right, so let's get into the detail.
Sorry, there was one question.
That's all right.
It says, do women's brains chatter more than men? And that is a very long name. I don't know who that is, sorry.
The truth of the matter is we don't know. The world of neuroscience is exploding, but we don't have fMRI scanners sensitive enough to measure brain chatter. And there's a really interesting thing is that once your brain knows that we're monitoring the chatter, you'll find that it stops. So it's kind of like a naughty school kid. Whilst it feels that nobody's observing it, it kind of gets on with weird things and it operates. But the minute that it becomes evident, it shifts and it moves out of the way. So the same thing has happened, that we've identified, some of you may be familiar with the SCARF model from David Rock. So as soon as people go in and they go, I am a genius and I know that you're status driven, the brain will go, no, I'm not. And it will shift into something else. So the minute that it feels scrutinized, it becomes a little bit embarrassed and it goes into something else. So I don't know. I'm definitely a bloke, and my brain chatters a lot. So if any ladies out there think you chatter a lot more than I do, then that's really, really deafening inside your head. Mine never shuts off. I don't think there's a distinction. If is the short answer.
Okay, brilliant. Adam says he thinks it only has to be 60% true 60% of the time to become a stereotype. I don't know if that's a question or just a statement. And Trevor, says, is right brain, left brain difference a myth?
It is and it isn't. I know that's a really crap answer. You do have hemispheres, and they do have functions that are more focused on them. So we do know that you've got cross-lateral. So the right-hand side of the brain does control the motor functions on the left, and vice versa. But a lot of the Morabian stuff about left brain logic, right brain creator, all that kind of stuff is generally being unpicked. And the best example I can give you is Malala Yousafzai. You know, she lost about 35% of her brain matter, but she's still one of the best functioning human beings on the planet. Because of neuroplasticity, your brain's got a go-to. So it's got a preferred. But when that wiring doesn't work, with exercise and with training, you can rewire it into something else. So there's a huge amount of stuff. If you read anything by a guy called David Eagleman, who's one of the big researchers in this, people who lose their sight, we're now educating them to read a book through their tongue. So there are devices that we can put on the tongue, which are kind of like tongue versions of Braille. So my tongue, you know, can kind of do hot and cold, and that's about it. So getting into the sophistication of reading the works of Shakespeare kind of blows me out of the water, but we can do it. And the same thing happens. So once parts of our neural network become inaccessible, the brain still has a requirement for it. So what it will do is it will use some of this unused potential and find a capacity. It just needs training. And yeah, the statement about once it's true 60% of the time for me, yeah, I'm going to write a rule. We don't believe it's a fact because we can't really measure it but we are slavishly trying to save energy. So if in my life, most of the time, so more than 50%, this is true, then I'll write it as true. All good? So, let's talk to you about these babies. So this is my cuddly neuron, and you've got about 83 billion of those inside your brain. So your brain kind of looks a little bit like that. It's a great big party of these neurons. So a little bit about the anatomy. So this is the top. And all of your signals, they're basically conductors. So all of your neuronal signals go from this end, the head, through to the tail. Yeah, the bits at the top are called dendrites because they resemble a tree. And each of these reaches out with receptors to take in signals from everything else. So the signals go in there, go through the head, they travel through this long tail called the axon, and they go down to these thinner bits called synapses. Now, people have a belief that these things connect physically, that they actually kind of fuse together. The truth of the matter is there's always a gap. So the actual connection is a chemical connection and an electrical connection rather than a physical one, which again goes into this idea that we can wire and rewire at will. So this connection can quite very easily be disconnected, and this can then connect to something else. So what tends to happen is you create a network of random thoughts that will basically create a chain. which is why learning takes time. In order to get dendritic growth, it's an organic process. So people, you know, as learning professionals, I'm sure you've had that wonderful moment where people in businesses will send you their problem children, and they'll say, go on this course and sprinkle a bit of oofle dust and transform this person into a knowledgeable, skilled human being. It just can't happen. You know, in the first instance, you know, we will take a link and we'll do this. And if that's the only exposure to that learning, what will happen is the brain will just begin to erode it. So the analogy of if you don't use it, you'll lose it is absolutely true for a neuron. So one of the things that we've identified is the more that this has signals passing through it, it creates a wrapper, a sheath of myelin. Myelin protects this so it can't be attacked by anything that's floating around inside your head, but it also improves the conductivity of the signal. So it's kind of like an insulator around an electrical wire. Once you get myelin around it, this becomes a superconductor. Now, being a superconductor means that it's easy to think that way, which is why we get into habitual thinking. So when we talk about this 60% truth, it's because we've myelinated that thought process. It becomes easy for us to do it, so it becomes the go-to. And this is why we've got people who have got beliefs that they are totally entrenched with because they've myelinated it. They've used that pathway so many times, it's become almost a motorway, a highway that is the fastest and easiest path. So faced with the choice of, do you want to create a new pathway, which is learning and thinking in system 2, or do you just want to go down the motorway? Your brain's going to always choose this one, which is why it's really difficult for us to get people to let go of their habitual thinking and begin to think new ways. So what you'll notice as you come out of lockdown is a huge amount of your population are just trying to reset to the way it was, because that's easier. Instead of, you know, going into conversations about what have we learned, what's really working, what do we need to change, that takes mental effort. It's just easier to go back to the workplace and get back on with the meetings schedule, and that's what we're fighting against. So all of these people that are championing a huge new norm have got to work against this. That's what's going on. Go on, Beck. Just nod your hand up, Beck.
Mute. Do you have any tips then for us when we are working with people whose beliefs are so ingrained that they can't see that there could be any difference?
Yeah, be gentle. What tends to happen is just at a survival basis is if you threaten a long-term thought, the reptilian complex sees that as a threat, because what it's saying is, if you're telling me I can't save energy this way, you're telling me that I've got to divert all of my energy into this, which means that I can't concentrate on a saber-toothed tiger. It will fight tooth and nail. So there's a bit of gentleness needed, that we need to kind of keep this going whilst we build this. So this is you can always run home to this safe place, but what I want you to do is just for now come out here. So what we tend to do in the training environment is we create a safe space where it's okay to ask questions, make mistakes, do all of that kind of first tentative steps. As you'll know, when Hazel grows up, just make it safe to go out there and have a go. And once the brain realizes that this new pathway isn't as scary and we keep practicing it, then this will begin to replace this. It's kind of like the same that we do when we're getting people off of addictive substances. You can't just take the addiction away, because they'll go into a really bad place of cold turkey. What you're doing is you're giving them an alternative, and once they learn the benefits of the alternative and they get the chemicals that they need, which I'll talk about in a second, then this will replace this one. So it's about doing it safely, but it's also about small repetition. So a lot of people will go along and they'll say, right, I've got to go and do this new skill. I've got to juggle, and I've got to do it really well in front of everybody. And that's too much, it overloads. And the way that people learn juggling is that they juggle with one ball first, and then they go with 2 balls and 1 hand. So it's break it down into smaller, easier chunks that they can repeat and practice. And once they get better at it and more confident at it, the network will switch. All good? Excellent. So how are we doing for time? Right, 10 more minutes. Let's talk about chemistry. So, neural networks are fired up by lots and lots of neurotransmitters and hormones. At the last count, I think we're up to about 147 different neurotransmitters and hormones. But I just want to talk to you about 6 that I think have the most impact on our specialism. So you'll probably be familiar with some of these names, but I just kind of want to give you the context with regard to where we're at and how they're useful. This is taken from Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. If you do nothing more from today than go and buy a copy of that book, then that's my recommendation. But in that, we identify the strongest drivers of our immediate behaviours. And what he talks about are these 6. So we've got dopamine, endorphins, serotonin, oxytocin, cortisol, and adrenaline. Now, adrenaline's not a neurotransmitter, but it does have a huge impact on behaviour. So that's why I've involved it in this. So the first pair, dopamine and endorphins, we call these the selfish drugs because you can self-administer them. So if you live in isolation, you can still give yourselves doses of dopamine and endorphins. The evolutionary requirement of dopamine is to create habits. So it's as addictive as cocaine. And the minute you get a sense of achievement or a sense of anticipation, you get a little tingle, and that tingle is the effect of a drip of dopamine. It exists to create habits. So once we do something that is good, you get a drip of dopamine and you're immediately addicted to it. So if we go back 35 million years, if you found a good source of food and water, you will get a drip of dopamine. And then when you go back to your cave, you don't get a drip of dopamine. So it makes you go back. And this is how we train dogs, and this is how we train children. So positive reinforcement and giving them a sense of achievement and anticipation gets them onto this cycle of following the path of dopamine. Endorphins were just drugs that are painkillers. They just allow us to go further and stretch ourselves. So sooner or later we'll run out of food, or there'll be a lion chasing us and we just need to go a little bit further. So in order to stop all of the signals of pain and help us go further, the brain can get flooded by endorphins. So again, this is the drug of anybody who does Ironman or triathlons or these great endurance things. They actually go through a huge amount of pain while they're exercising, but they're addicted to the high that they get as soon as they stop. So, you know, anybody who does do marathons, don't drive a car straight after it because you're really not in control. So these are how we drive ourselves. So if we set ourselves small goals, so when we go to the gym, nobody goes to the gym to do less reps than they did before. So when we set our goal of saying, I'm going to do 11 reps instead of 10, you give yourself a bit of dopamine, and that's why we get addicted. Again, children who are brought up and who are given presents for being good boys and girls, you will find that they're more likely to become shopaholics because they're addicted to the sensation of getting something because it means that they've done a good job. So they make these associations and biases that says, if I've done well, then I can go and treat myself to a new shirt or a new watch or a new whatever it is. So again, people will show you their latest watches, you know, the whole, I've got the latest phone thing. It's just them saying, and haven't I been a good boy? So a lot of the science that sits behind human craving for more and more upgrades is actually dopamine. So Apple are very, very
Well, let's hope this is just a momentary blip again.
Oh, hello. Oh, you're back.
We have a couple of questions for you.
Yes, please.
Lab asked just before you turned the page, I've got to come back to it. Is rote learning easier because of the reduced energy required to create the neural connection pathways?
Is what learning? So rote learning?
Yes.
Yes, is the short answer. The more complicated answer is, so long as it's interesting. Rote learning that becomes boring and mundane tends to turn the brain off. So the brain also likes vasopressin, it likes novelty. So the challenge for us is, how do we get multiple repetitions without it sounding or feeling repetitious? So this is where any of you that have gone into brain-friendly learning will talk about having a rich environment. So learning through all 5 senses is a way of getting a repeated message through different avenues, as opposed to going 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 2 is 4, and getting the eye roll. So it's looking at creative ways to get a different version of the same learning. So watching a PowerPoint presentation, reading a follow-up article, and then going and talking to somebody about it. 3 ways of getting a repeat of the same learning. Great shout.
Brilliant. And Meg asks, is it true that when we tell stories, when facilitating or selling, it produces cortisol and oxytocin?
Absolutely. Stories are the most powerful way of getting into the limbic system. Facts, logic, data, spreadsheets are neocortex learning. They only apply to the logical brain. The way that we can move it quickly into the limbic system is allowing the learner's brain to kind of play a part in the story or attach to it emotionally. And actually, if you think about it, we didn't read spreadsheets to our children at the age of 2. We told them stories. So we've created a neural pathway that is much more well-trodden and much more refined in our storytelling. Storytelling appeals to our visual, our emotional, all of those kind of brains. So absolutely. And by telling stories that people can connect to, yes, it does create oxytocin. It lowers our guard because we like it. It takes us to a place where we trusted people.
Awesome. That's it for now.
Great observation. Just looking at the clock, so I need to be really quick now. The next thing, we can't exist on our own. So evolution made us social creatures, and the social chemicals that we need are serotonin and oxytocin. So we've just talked about oxytocin. That really is a neural inhibitor. It basically stops our reptilian complex thinking that everybody's going to attack us. So it basically gives it a few pints of lager to calm down. So we're naturally on guard with strangers, which is why the Tuckman model of forming, storming, norming, we're always on guard with strangers. So we need to get oxytocin flowing really quickly. Oxytocin is increased through contact. So handshakes, hugs, high fives, all of those kind of things will get oxytocin flowing. If you've got a highly politically correct environment that really doesn't like men rubbing themselves up against women, then laughter, singing, eating together, and telling stories together. So where we create a space where people can tell their own story, that's a massive tribal, trust-building, oxytocin-flowing process. So again, be more cognizant about the quality of our introductions as opposed to, if you were a loaf of bread, what would you be? You know, tell us about your journey. Tell us what brought you here. Tell us the reasons why you're on this course are much better quality questions than, if you could be anybody in history, who would you be? Because most people will not divulge anything personal. So in a safe way, get them to kind of show a bit of vulnerability, because that creates oxytocin. Serotonin is what we get from other people who we've chosen to trust when they show appreciation and value for us. So again, small rituals of saying thank you, that's a great piece of input. And, you know, applause, anything that says that was really great contribution, really gets serotonin. The cool thing about serotonin, as opposed to dopamine lasts about 3 seconds and then you need another hit, which is why we stay on platform games and on these, Angry Birds, because you need a next hit. But one person saying thank you to you can last you a lifetime. Most of you watching me now will remember somebody right now who made you feel special. Maybe 20 years ago, they may even not be on the planet now, but you can still feel the warm glow in your chest that they gave you. That's the power of serotonin. and again, this is what we're working in businesses, is they've gone down a dopamine process of rewarding people. So if you're a good boy or girl, I'll give you a bonus. Well, that makes mercenaries in your business. But if you just create a relationship and say, I really appreciate what you've done for me today, that person will be loyal and they'll be more productive. So a lot of the work I'm doing in nuclear is moving them away from extrinsic reward to intrinsic reward built through trust in relationships. The final two down here are what we call what originally they were your survival chemicals. So cortisol and adrenaline. In order to survive, in order for you to stop your brain doing its curious thing and run away or fight something, cortisol gets injected into your brain and basically takes your entire neocortex out of the game. So all of this internal dialogue is not very useful when you want to get away from a saber-toothed tiger, because this is saying, I wonder what that fur would feel like. That's a straight, what a nice cat. I would love to do that. That's really not useful in a survival situation. So basically it needs to just take that out, and cortisol takes that all offline. So that gives you your limbic response, which is an emotional response of fighting or running away or eating or starving or going and making babies. Adrenaline is not a neurochemical, but what it does do is it gives you the power in your muscles in order to do whatever you need to do. So it makes you strong like wool. So in order for you to do the survival technique, you need to have all of your blood, all of your glucose going to the muscles that's required. And that's what adrenaline does. So we tend to, in modern world, these are the stress chemicals. So cortisol gets a little bit of a bad press because it has got long-term effects. So too much cortisol in your system over a long period of time can have a massively detrimental effect on your health, on your blood system, on your coronary system. But actually, we do need to have it. So small levels of stress that are manageable are really useful, particularly in the learning environment, because it makes the brain wake up. So again, you know, telling people, I'm going to ask you a question in a second, puts a little bit of cortisol in, makes them wake up, and then they can do it. In the UK, we've got an awful phrase, we call it the idiot's dog whistle. So that instead of going, Beck, what do you think of that, Beck? You actually say, Beck, I'm coming to you in a second. I'm going to ask you what this is. So you give them 2 bits of cortisol in order to switch on. And that way the brain tunes in rather than going, oh, and them giving you a silly answer. So they're useful, but what we need to do is give signals. So on an evolutionary scale, this system worked well for 15 minutes and no more. The problem that we've got in modern world is we don't have many threats that go away. We've got long-term pandemics, we've got rumors, we've got gossip, we've got restructures. And what happens is your brain does a reset on your cortisol level, so that people are beginning to struggle because they're already highly triggered on cortisol. So that they've done what we call a soft reset. It's kind of like when you jump into a cold swimming pool, your body is shocked and it kind of goes, ah! But after about 3 seconds, the pool feels normal. That doesn't mean the pool's gotten warmer. It just means your brain says, this isn't going to change anytime soon. We just need to reset ourselves. And that's what's happening in businesses where there's lots and lots of low-level stress. People are just resetting, and it's making them ill. But on a purely healthy basis, you do need these things. So challenging ourselves, stretch goals, all of those kind of things are really, really healthy from a neurological basis. But what we do need to provide the brain is evidence that the danger's gone away. So 35 million years ago, the tiger was no longer around and it had gone away. And you could see that, so you could relax. What you need to do is say, right, the test is now over, or that period is now finished. And that way people will be able to come down from it. I'm looking at my clock now, and that means I've burned all my time. So I'm available for any more questions if there are any more. And I'm going to say thank you very much for your attention. I hope that's given you some curiosity. If any of you are interested, there's some literature that I can send to you. So if you go to Bill or to Kerry or to Beck, let me know and I can send you that as a PDF. But other than that, I'll take a few questions and then I'll hand you back.
Thanks very much, Steve. It's been terrific. And just listening to you talking and going through all of that, it brings back so many great memories. I mentioned Tony Buzan before, and I can't do it in person with you right now, but I just want to share my screen with you and award you something. So I'm just going to share my screen. And can you see that?
I can.
All right. More than a decade ago, Tony created a thing called the Warriors of the Mind. And this was a pin that we helped him create. And I've got one here on my jumper now, and I'll have one on every one of my jackets. And it's essentially, it's your brain cell, as you can see it there.
I can, yeah.
And, we've given out thousands of those all over the world to what we call the Warriors of the Mind. So anybody we ever trained, everybody we ever taught mind mapping to, memory skills, reading, creative thinking, things like that, we made them a warrior of the mind. So I can't give you the pin directly, but I'm awarding you a Warrior of the Mind pin right now. And welcome to our society.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and it was
I'm full of serotonin now.
Yes, that's good. And again, you know, one of the things that also taught me, which was something that I think is very important for all of us that are here today, is, you know, learning and development and helping people is about passion. Tony had passion for mental literacy. I've had passion for critical and creative thinking, or deliberate creative thinking. You have a passion for what you do. And I think that passion combined with good research, good understanding, going back to the basics of things, which is what you're doing for us today, and what we do in our businesses is very important. So thank you very much for that. I appreciated that. Carrie, did you want to say anything at this stage before we move to the next phase?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Steve. I was just thinking all the way through that session, just wow, there was just so many tips and everything. And I can see clearly why Beck thought it would be a great session to share with our tribe of learning and development professionals. And I can see in the chat box, people are saying fantastic, fascinating, all of those things. So if you've got any words that people want to share, put them in the chat box now, just to give
Please do.
feedback on his session. But I loved and I also forgot to say at the start, thank you for your early start in the morning, because you had to get up bright early.
The sun's up now.
So your day's starting, ours is sort of finishing. But I loved how you said at the start, you know, from pour to snore, which I can sort of relate to. So there was lots of tips throughout that session talking about, you know, the removal of fear, chunking it, easing people into new learning. Building the relationships is really important. It also explained why my husband hugs the remote every night and drives me.
Oh yeah, that's our new spear.
Well, now it makes perfect sense. So everything you said was really practical, and I've done a lot of research into the brain, and for some reason it switches off when people go into the deep dive into this theory. But the way that you presented it this afternoon or today, it was just really easy to follow. And I've learned, and it's sticking for once, which is great.
Yeah,
so, and I'm sure this is one of those masterclasses I personally am going to watch over and over again because there's just so much in there for us to take away. So, thank you very much for your time. I loved it, and hope to come back in the future for another masterclass, because I'm sure everybody would be interested to learn more from you.
Fantastic.
Thank you,
Big
everybody.
thumbs up and clap for Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's not on mute. Everybody.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Again, what we're going to do now is move into that segment that I spoke about a little bit before. So, Steve, you're welcome to hang around if you want to for about 20 minutes before we finish up. Or if you're going to have some breakfast, go ahead and do that.
I'm just going to sit back on my Westlife stool and relax.
All right. We might just mute you then, if that's all right.
Yeah, perfect. I'll mute myself.
Okay, good stuff. All right, what I want to do now in this session is turn it over to, or talk a little bit about the certification process that Carrie and Joshua and I have been looking at over the last little while, and Carrie announced it yesterday in our email that went out, what's happening at ILP. And I guess I want to frame this. It says, last time when I spoke about how important it is to differentiate ourselves, it was about brand awareness and brand differentiation. One of the things I think that's going to be happening in the coming months and years is that as L&D professionals, we need to be able to stand out from the crowd, see ourselves in different ways, but also be able to demonstrate that we are professionals in different spaces, that we can present ourselves in different ways. And one of the reasons that the certification process came about was to be able to help people do that through a peer review process that allows us to say, here's where I've been, here's how I've demonstrated my value. And by doing that, we can stand out from the crowd. And one of the things ILP wants to do is be able to help our members with that process. So Carrie, can you just tell us a little bit? We started with the CLP, the Certified Learning Professional. Now we've moved to a number of different certifications. Just maybe explain to us why that happened, how it happened, and what our hope is to make that all work for our members.
All right, sure. I just might go ahead and just share my screen if that's okay. All right, just so people can see. You're probably seeing other emails. Hang on one sec.
No, you're okay.
You can see the slides?
Yep.
All right, great. I've just got two monitors, so I'm not quite sure which one was showing. So basically when we started, sorry, I haven't got control of my slides, just bear with me.
You're back on screen.
Oh, there you go. I've just gone completely around. All right, so can you see my slides now?
Yes, but you need to put it into slideshow.
Yep, no, that's all right. Apologies for that. One of those things of having too many things opened all the time. So ILP has evolved over the years, and we're now going back to our original purpose, which is I really wanted to help raise the standards within the industry. So just raising it, we thought we have to reset what the standards are so that we can make sure that all of our learning initiatives actually will make that impact and get that positive results and enhance performance. So basically just the need came about because there wasn't a current benchmark. By default, the certificate for in training and assessment became the industry standard, which doesn't cover all the things that L&D professionals need now and in the future to be successful. So we wanted to reset those standards and then also recognise and reward, as Bill said, those people that are demonstrating those skills and standing out amongst their peers with being able to deliver really good learning initiatives. So what we did was set out and do a bit of research with just setting the standard workshops around Australia. So we had about 200 people in workshops telling us what they thought L&D people needed to be successful. We then validated it by talking to corporate heads of L&D just to get their input and see from both perspectives, both from internal and external, what is needed to be successful. From that, we developed a framework, which was the capability framework. So 6 dimensions, and it actually comes up with about 220, we're up to about 235 capabilities now. But across those 6 dimensions, we've managed to sort of theme those into that. So there's professional attributes. So they're things like your emotional intelligence, continual development, strategy and planning, really important because learning is no longer just a standalone event. It's a process, and there's, you've got to look at before and after strategies, priming your learners, as well as what Steve was talking about, that continual learning afterwards to embed that learning. Obviously, designing and development, there's a range of methodologies and techniques that have come on board over the last 10, 30 years. Execute and deliver, how we engage our learners. It's not just face-to-face, it's online, virtual, e-learning, all of those. How do we create those blended experiences? Evaluate and feedback. Making sure that we are actually making impact. How do we do that? Not just our happy sheets, but just going into a deep dive on making sure we've achieved or met the stakeholders' expectations and measured the impact of our learning. And then the last one is the new one, which is business smart. So it's, how do I market my programs to make sure it gets to the right people, they understand what's happening. Courageous consulting, which is really important so that we can sort of make sure we do deliver the right learning solution and meet our stakeholders' needs. And the other one is finance. So be able to talk to the heads of L&D about the impact, returns of investment, all of those sorts of things as well. And from that, what we did was we've actually now developed a capability assessment so people can go in and actually measure that. But we've also come up, as Bill said, into all of our certifications that we have available. So with our certifications, we've actually got 3 for individuals, oh, actually, no, 4, I say now. We actually launched one this week, which is now what's happening at ILP. So the Certified Learning Facilitator has been around before, for a while, so it's having a look at people that have got that expertise in designing, but you know, delivering really engaging learning experiences and making sure that they've listened to their stakeholders, they've identified what is needed, they know their learners, they've created the experience for their audience. This week we launched the virtual facilitator, so that's for people that we've already seen demonstrate their facilitation skills. It's just transferring that into a virtual environment and having a look at how they present online, what are their technical skills like, have they got a plan B if their screen freezes, or if they get Zoom bombed, like ILP unfortunately has had the experience a few times. Certified learning designers, having a look at people that can design blended learning methodologies that meet the learner's needs. And the fourth one for individual is certified learning consultant, which will be launching in the next month as well. So these are people that are highly experienced across all aspects of learning development that can work either internal or external, but helping organisations build their learning culture, their learning strategies and things like that. We've also got it where we want to recognise people's programs, so it's not just them individually, but have they developed a really, really good program that is getting the desired results? So that's a certified learning solution. And the last one, which we should be releasing in probably about 6 weeks, we've done a lot of research on what makes organisations successful through their learning initiatives, and it's got a holistic approach. So that's going to be really exciting, and we've actually partnered with a couple of universities to work on that. And yeah, so we're looking forward to that. And the aim is, with all of these certifications, that we're actually opening up doors. So when we've actually seen people in action, we know what their expertise are, we know what their skills are, we're able then to connect them to the right client or provide opportunities to showcase their skills as well. So for the certified learning organisation, it'll be our certified learning consultants that'll go out and work with them, not the institute itself. So we're all about creating those opportunities to help you grow and get more exposed into potential clients and opportunities. So that was sort of, that was it. That was sort of a bit of a quick rush there. So Bill, did you have any questions or?
Well, I guess you could probably stop sharing the slides now if you want, Carrie, but I think one of the things about it is that one of the reasons you did this, I think, was to be able to break it down so we could understand where different learning development professionals are at, and also where their focus is, so that we could target them, so that they can stand out for the things that they're specifically want to be good at, and also that opportunity with the solutions and the learning consultant idea to be able to have ILP champion them to the world. So that's a building process, I think, that I think people will value. We've got on the website, you've got the downloadable booklets and things like that for people to look at. From a point of view of a process, we're going through some changes at the moment in the way in which the world works, but how do you see the process at this stage working for people wanting to go through the certification?
Obviously, unfortunately, we can't have the face-to-face one, so we've switched to virtual. But I guess the first thing for people is to decide, you know, which sort of certification would they be interested in, check to see whether they meet that criteria, you know, they've got the experience, they've got the evidence to be able to prove it, put in an application. What we do is use some of our highly experienced fellows and our CF certified learning facilitators to be our assessors. So there's a bit of preparation, but the whole assessment process is very holistic. So it's, as I said, it's not, if you're doing facilitation, it's not just about that, but it's, well, what was your stakeholder engagement? How did you identify what the need is? How do you know your learners? How do you prime your learners? Then we observe you delivering it. So obviously, given the current times, we're not doing face-to-face, so it'll be sort of sharing an online session or sending us a video so that we can observe that. And then following up afterwards, just sort of, you know, checking what methodologies you used, how you review it, how do you stay in touch and support the learners post that learning, how do you make sure that you've met the stakeholders' expectations. So it really is a holistic process that we take you through. We constantly review it and strengthen that, the whole process as well. And then hopefully, most of the people that go through it get some fantastic constructive feedback. Bill's one of our assessors down in Melbourne, but all of the CLFs, and I'm not quite sure we've got some online now, have always said it's so good to get some real deep constructive feedback from people who are in the industry. So you're not getting just your participants or peers, but you're getting some valuable, and even the most experienced facilitators that we've got through have just thoroughly enjoyed the process. So if anything, if you really want to continue professional development, it's worth the process going through, and that's why we started it. Sorry, Bill.
There's a question there about how much is it? It's dirt cheap. Carrie doesn't like to charge very much for things, but we can discuss prices. But I think there was something in the what's happening at ILP. I think it's about $395 for a CLF, and then you've got a special deal at the moment for the CLF and the CVF.
Yep.
Let me just talk a little bit about this. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, please just put up your hand or take yourself off mute and interrupt me. Because this is part of a discussion mode, I think, that we want to have. So I might actually put you into a gallery view so I can see anybody putting up their hands. One of the things that we had questions on is why become certified? Why would I want to do that? And I mentioned before that for me, it's like in a changing environment, you want to be able to stand out from the crowd. You want to be able to somehow get some sort of edge over other people in some way. But there's lots of different certifications. It's not just about the piece of paper. One of the things I was reflecting on with Martin Proust the other day, and Martin's been one of our real champions in this area, is the benefit is not in the outcome, but in the process. And if I just think about the process, as I see it, Carrie, one of the things we have now is we have the framework which has been developed, and we have that capability assessment. So anybody that's interested in improving where they're trying to go can do that assessment. It's a self-assessment, but they could review it with their manager, with their peers, with whatever they want to do in order to say, does that reflect where the real status is? And I recommend that. But the next stage in the certification process is the application, the submission. And that's an in-depth understanding of self-reflection. It says, here are the questions. Can you demonstrate this? How would you show this? How would you put that together? And I found that a lot of people just going through that say, geez, I forgot that I was good at that. That's something I haven't done before. So that self-reflection is about really understanding where you're at that stage in time. Then, of course, there comes back, they says, now I've got to actually produce something. In as you said, when we did it face-to-face, people would come together and they would be presenting in one of the worst crowds that they would generally want to be in front of, or the one they're most afraid of, which is their peers. So creating a presentation for peer review is another way of pushing ourselves, testing ourselves a little bit more. And then, of course, there is the reviewers, the work that, say, I've done and you've done, of reviewing the capability assessment, of reviewing the application and reviewing the presentation, and then providing that feedback and mentoring about what people can do. And I know Martin has mentioned a few times that was one of the things he valued a lot out of that process, because there's that one-on-one, 1 hour process of going back over those things. Then, of course, there's the award itself, which is the recognition. But from that reward, what you get is you get that acknowledgement on the website, you get the acknowledgement in e-letters, at conferences, things like that. And of course, there's the badges, which now in this world of globalization, those badges, those micro-learning badges are becoming more and more important to some areas. Some of us don't care about them too much for ourselves, but you got to acknowledge that sometimes other people care about them. And then, of course, there's the benefits and the value of actually being able to contribute to ILP as a presenter, as putting articles forward, things like that. So one of the things I found is that doing the certification is not about the piece of paper, it's actually about the journey. And then the maintaining it shows that you're actually continuing to go along things. So that's part of what I was excited about in seeing the various processes that we've been working on. So at this stage, I just like to say, I think it's a great way to look at things. I think it's a good way for ILP to serve its members, but I'm hoping that other members will see it that way as well. So yeah. I just wanted to ask anybody if you have any questions before I start to close up.
Actually, Bill, I just wanted to add to that comment, because the capability assessment is free for all of our members. So if you just want to take that, because We don't know what we don't know, and quite often a lot of our members are independent facilitators, so they don't get the opportunity to see other people in action. So that was the thing that, you know, we thought getting some feedback from experience would be really good. I get a lot of people say, I've got my certificate for in training and assessment, and I'll go, okay, well, what else have you done to continue the learning? And quite often it's not. That's my piece of paper or my ticket. We recently did 400 L&D professionals took the assessment from a government department. They were sort of bragging before they did it that they were highly skilled. They did a lot of development internally. When they did the assessment and it's basically what L&D professionals need now in the future and in the future to be successful, their average was 40%. So they were completely shocked. But as I said, you don't know what you don't know. So it is really, really important. I would say just take the free assessment, just have a look at, you know, what skills you need, and then just as a starting point. Sorry. Thanks, Bill.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything? No? Okay, well then that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I guess to close off, once again, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Carrie. Some things coming up. 2 weeks from now, we have Gerald Pushman with talking about, you know, an introduction to video. 2 weeks after that, we have Corinne Podger talking about how to use your smartphone for social media, and she has some really interesting processes about how to engage yourself with your clients and things like that. And I'm looking for more masterclass presenters of the ilk of Steve and Jane that we've had. Some of the topics I'm hoping we might be able to find out about is at some stage, I want to get somebody like Martin to talk a little bit about maybe lessons in mental health from stage 4 lockdowns, what's been happening out of that kind of thing. I'm very passionate about the use of stories in learning and development and how we engage with things. So how do we actually create stories, and how do we build stories in an online environment and in a virtual instructor training environment? I've also been thinking that maybe podcasts and something around that area to build your tribe might be something of value. We have the general one that we've been discussing in the member lounge about pivoting to a totally online business. Some people want to do that, some people don't, but it's not just about taking stuff and putting it online, it's actually changing into an online business. And another thing I just came up with today when I was watching Dataland about artificial intelligence, and then listening to one of our radio announcers here talking to somebody who's using artificial intelligence to figure out how their cat and dog are feeling at the moment. I thought, wonder where artificial intelligence is going in learning and development. In particular, how is artificial intelligence going to interlink into the assessment or the understanding of learning transfer? So I've got some interesting topics that I got in my mind. What I now need is somebody who's really good at some of these things to talk about it. So if anybody has any ideas on any things or any other topics that we could put into these master classes, please let me know, and we'll do our very best to make them all happen. So on that note, how about a big thumbs up for a final picture? Big thumbs up, things up. Hey! Good stuff. All right. Thank you, everyone.